The bar was old and dark. It sat at the edge of Twilight Station, far from the busy trading halls where merchants sold their goods. This was a place for veterans, for those who had seen war and lived to remember it. Kethvar sat in his usual corner. His 4 arms rested on the table, thin and weak with age. Once, his skin had glowed bright blue like all healthy Velerans. Now it was dull gray, like ash. He was old, very old, but his mind was sharp, and his memories were sharper. Tonight, young cadets from the Valoran Military Academy had come to see him. There were 6 of them, barely past their growth cycles, their skin still bright with youth. They wore their uniforms proudly. They thought they knew what war meant. They knew nothing. One of them, a female with eager eyes, leaned forward. "Sir, is it true you fought on the human front? Is it true you saw them? The humans?" The other veterans in the bar went quiet. Some of them looked away. One of them, an old male missing 2 of his 4 arms, simply stood up and walked out. Kethvar took a long drink from his glass. The liquid burned his throat. Good. He needed it for this. "Yes," he said, "I saw them." The cadets exchanged excited looks. To them, humans were stories, legends, the primitive species that had been wiped out 50 years ago in the Great War. They learned about it in their history classes. Humans were described as weak, emotional, divided, easy prey. "Tell us," another cadet said. "Tell us what they were really like." Kethvar looked at each of them slowly. He saw himself in their faces, young, proud, stupid. "You think your training has prepared you for war," he said. His voice was rough, like stones grinding together. "You think you know what battle means. You know nothing. Nothing prepares you for humans." The cadets shifted uncomfortably. They had expected exciting stories, glory, victory. The old veteran's tone promised something else. "I will tell you about the humans," Kethvar continued. "But first, you must understand something. Everything you learned in your academies is wrong. The humans were not weak. They were not primitive. They were not easy prey." He paused. "They were the most terrifying enemy our empire has ever faced." He began his story. 52 years ago, Kethvar was a young combat medic assigned to the 4th Medical Division. The Valoran Empire had just discovered a small planet at the edge of the galaxy. The dominant species called it Earth. They called themselves humans. The High Command studied them for 2 cycles. The reports were encouraging. Humans had only recently achieved interstellar travel. Their ships were slow and crude. They had no unified government. They fought among themselves constantly. They were divided by languages, by borders, by beliefs. "Easy conquest," the generals said. 3 planetary rotations at most. They called it Operation Swift Mercy, a kind name for an invasion. The plan was simple. Arrive in force, demonstrate superior power, accept surrender, move on to the next system. Kethvar remembered the fleet. 2,000 warships, 50,000 soldiers, enough firepower to crack a small moon. They entered Earth's solar system expecting to find frightened primitives ready to bow. They found something else. The first battle was at a human outpost on their 4th planet, a cold red world they called Mars. The outpost held maybe 300 humans, soldiers, scientists, families. The Valoran commander gave them one chance to surrender. The humans responded by destroying 3 Valoran landing ships with mining equipment. Mining equipment. They had no military weapons, so they used what they had. Drilling lasers became guns. Excavation charges became bombs. Construction vehicles became war machines. In one night, those 300 humans killed 800 Valoran soldiers. The Empire sent reinforcements, 10 times the original force. It took 2 weeks to capture that single outpost. By the end, only 47 humans remained alive. They had run out of food. They had run out of water. They had run out of weapons. They still refused to surrender. HFY was sent in with the medical teams to process the survivors. He expected broken creatures, defeated, ready to beg for mercy. He found a young woman instead. Her name was Yuna. She was small, even by human standards. Her face was covered in blood and dust. Her combat suit was torn. One of her arms hung at a wrong angle, clearly broken. Through the shattered visor of her helmet, HFY could see her eyes. She was smiling, not the smile of madness, not the smile of surrender. It was the smile of someone who had already won, even in defeat. She looked at HFY like she knew something he did not. "Do you speak our language?" she asked. Her voice was calm, too calm. HFY nodded. He had been trained in human languages for medical purposes. "Good," Yuna said. "Tell your commanders something for me." She took a step forward. The Valoran guards raised their weapons. She ignored them. "Tell them this is just the beginning," she said. "Tell them we will never stop. Tell them that for every one of us you kill, 10 more will rise. Tell them that we are not afraid." Then she opened her hand. HFY saw the detonator a moment before she pressed it. The explosion killed Yuna and 12 Valoran soldiers. It wounded 30 more, including HFY. He still carried the scars, small white marks on his lower left arm where the shrapnel had entered. He showed them to the cadets now. "This was my first day on the human front," he said. "My first hour. One small female. Broken arm. No weapons except what she had built herself. And she smiled at me before she died." The cadets were silent. Their excitement was gone. In its place was something else. Fear, perhaps. Or the beginning of understanding. "The general said 3 planetary rotations," HFY continued. "The war lasted 12 years. We lost 4 million soldiers. We destroyed their cities. We burned their farms. We killed their families. And still they fought. They always fought." He finished his drink and set the glass down. "That was Yuna's gift to me. Not the scars on my arm, the scars in my mind, the understanding that humans do not fight like other species. They do not surrender when defeat is certain. They do not run when hope is gone. They smile. They laugh. And they make sure that even in death they take something from you." The old veteran looked at the young cadets with empty eyes. "You wanted to know what humans were like," he said. "They were monsters. They were heroes. They were everything in between. And every single night for 50 years, I have dreamed of a young woman named Yuna, smiling at me through broken glass." He raised his hand and called for another drink. "That was only the first story. Would you like to hear more?" The cadets looked at each other. Part of them wanted to leave. Part of them needed to stay. They nodded slowly. HFY smiled. It was not a happy smile. "Good. Then let me tell you about Mars Colony 7. Let me tell you about Captain Park Do-yun and the siege that broke our spirit." The night was young. The stories were just beginning. And somewhere in the dark corners of the bar, other veterans listened and remembered their own nightmares from the human front. HFY poured himself another drink. The cadets waited in silence. The memory of Yuna's smile had shaken them. They were beginning to understand that this was not a story of glory. This was a story of survival. "Mars Colony 7, the old veteran began. Year 2 of the war. The largest human settlement on the Red Planet. 200,000 civilians. Families, children, workers. The generals thought it would be simple. Surround them. Cut off their supplies. Wait for them to starve. Accept their surrender." He let out a sound that might have been a laugh. It had no humor in it. "We waited 8 months. They never surrendered." The siege began in what humans called winter. Valoran forces surrounded the colony with overwhelming numbers. 50,000 soldiers, heavy artillery, air support. The humans inside had no military to speak of. A few hundred security officers, some old weapons. Nothing that could challenge a real army, The Valoran commander sent a message to the colony. "Surrender now. You will be treated fairly. Your lives will be spared. Resistance is pointless." The humans sent back a single word: no. So the waiting began. Keth Var was stationed at a medical base 3 kilometers from the colony walls. His job was simple: treat wounded soldiers, prepare for the eventual processing of surrendered humans. Everyone expected it to be over within a month. The first week passed, then the second, then the third. No white flags, no requests for negotiation, nothing but silence from behind those walls. On the 32nd day, humans began attacking. Not large attacks, small ones. A patrol would disappear in the night. A supply vehicle would explode without warning. Snipers would fire from impossible angles, then vanish before anyone could respond. The Valoran commanders were confused. They had complete control of the area around the colony. How were humans getting out? They discovered the tunnels on day 45. The humans had been digging. For months before the siege even began, they had been preparing. Tunnels ran for kilometers in every direction, hidden beneath the red dirt. Humans would crawl through them at night, strike quickly, then disappear underground. The Empire sent soldiers into the tunnels. Most did not return. "I treated one survivor," Keth Var told the cadets. "A young officer. He was shaking so badly he could not hold a cup of water. He told me what happened down there. The humans had turned the tunnels into traps, explosives, cave-ins, false paths that led nowhere. And in the darkness, they waited with knives." The officer had seen his entire squad killed one by one. He had heard their screams echo through the stone, and through it all, he heard the humans talking to each other. Calm voices, sometimes laughing. "He kept saying the same thing," Keth Var continued. "They were laughing, they were dying, and they were laughing." The months continued to pass. Valoran losses mounted. The generals grew impatient. They ordered a direct assault on the colony walls. It was a disaster. Captain Park Do-hyun had prepared for this. He was a former security officer, not a real soldier. But he had read every military book he could find. He had studied every war in human history, and he had turned 200,000 civilians into an army. Grandmothers carried explosives hidden in their oxygen tanks. They would walk toward Valoran positions, smiling and waving, then detonate themselves when soldiers came close. Children drew maps of patrol routes in the dirt, memorized them, then erased the evidence before anyone could see. Every person in the colony had a job. Everyone was a soldier. Keth Var remembered one story that spread through the Valoran ranks. A 16-year-old human boy named Teho. During the main assault, 3 Valoran walking machines broke through the outer wall. These were massive weapons of war, 10 meters tall, armed with cannons that could level buildings, nearly impossible to destroy. Teho destroyed all 3. He had stolen a mining laser from the industrial district. It was not a weapon. It was a tool for cutting rock, but he had modified it, increased its power, focused its beam. He climbed to the top of a water tower and waited. When the walkers came, he fired, not at their armor, at their legs, the joints where the metal was weakest. One by one, he cut them down. It took him 4 hours. He never moved from his position. When the Valoran soldiers finally located him, he was still firing. They killed him, of course, but not before he had turned the tide of the assault. The attack failed. Valoran forces retreated with massive casualties. The siege continued. "We could not understand it," Keth Var said. "We had more soldiers, better weapons, complete control of the sky. But they would not break. They ate recycled protein. They drank water reclaimed from their own bodies. They lived in darkness to save power, and they kept fighting." He looked at the cadets. Their faces were pale. Good. They were learning. "Do you know what finally ended the siege?" They shook their heads. "We bombed them from orbit." The words hung in the air like poison. After 8 months, the High Command decided that the colony was not worth the losses. They pulled back our forces. Then they fired from space. Everything, every weapon, until nothing was left but ash and glass. Kethvar's voice grew quiet. 200,000 humans, gone in minutes, men, women, children. We burned them because we could not beat them. But that was not the end of the story. In the final hours before the bombardment, while Valoran ships charged their weapons in orbit, Captain Park Do-Yun was not hiding. He was broadcasting. Every ship in the system received his transmission, every human outpost, every hidden base. Do-Yun had spent the last 8 months documenting everything: Valoran patrol patterns, weapon weaknesses, communication codes, supply routes, everything his people had learned through blood and sacrifice. He sent it all. His final words were recorded and played in every human settlement for the rest of the war. Kethvar had heard them translated many times. We are already dead. We know this. But our deaths mean nothing if we do not give you the tools to win. Learn from us. Remember us. And make them pay for every single life. Then the sky turned white. And Mars Colony 7 was gone. Kethvar finished his drink. Captain Do-Yun was not a great soldier. He had no formal training, no experience in real combat. But he held off our entire army for 8 months with nothing but civilians and hope. He turned grandmothers into warriors. He turned children into spies, and in his final moments, he gave his people the knowledge they needed to keep fighting. He looked at the cadets with tired eyes. This is what humans are. They do not accept defeat. They do not lie down and die. They make you bleed for every meter of ground. And even when you destroy them completely, they find a way to hurt you from beyond the grave. The young female cadet spoke softly. What happened after? Did the other humans give up? Kethvar actually laughed this time. A real laugh. Dark and bitter. Give up? No. After Mars Colony 7, the humans fought harder. Every human in the system heard Do-Hyun's final broadcast. Every human knew that the Empire would burn entire cities rather than accept the cost of real war. He leaned forward. They stopped showing mercy that day. The war became something else, something worse. And the most terrifying human of all was just beginning to hunt. He called for another drink. Let me tell you about Lieutenant Jisoo. Let me tell you about the monster of the Kuiper Belt. The name fell from Kethvar's lips like a curse. Lieutenant Jisoo. Around the bar, older veterans who had been pretending not to listen suddenly went still. One of them put down his drink and walked out without a word. Another made a religious gesture that Kethvar had not seen in decades. The cadets noticed. They looked at each other with growing unease. Who was she? The young female asked. Kethvar did not answer immediately. He stared at his drink, watching the liquid move in the dim light. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, softer, like a man describing a nightmare. The Kuiper Belt, he began, is the dark place at the edge of the human system, cold, empty, nothing but ice and rock floating in eternal night. Our supply ships had to pass through it to reach the inner planets. It was supposed to be safe. There was nothing there, no bases, no stations, nothing but void. He paused. Nothing except her. The attacks began in year 3 of the war. Supply ships started disappearing. At first, the commanders thought it was mechanical failure. Space was dangerous. Ships broke down. Things happened. Then they found wreckage and bodies. Someone was hunting Valoran ships in the darkness, picking them off one by one. The attacks were precise, professional, deadly. Whoever was doing this knew exactly where to strike. They disabled engines first, then communications, then weapons, then they boarded. The High Command believed it was a human fleet, perhaps 50 ships working together. They sent a battle group to sweep the region. patrol ships, destroyers, enough firepower to handle any human force. The battle group found nothing. But while they searched, 3 more supply ships were destroyed behind them. It went on for months, Cathvar said. We sent more ships. We changed our routes. We added escorts. Nothing worked. The attacks continued, and we still could not find the enemy. He looked at the cadets. Do you want to know why we could not find them? They nodded. Because there was no fleet, no 50 ships, no hidden base. Cathvar's voice dropped to almost a whisper. There was only one ship, one human. Her name was Lieutenant Jisoo, and she hunted alone. Jisoo had been a mining ship pilot before the war. She knew the Kuiper Belt better than anyone. Every asteroid, every ice field, every shadow where a small ship could hide. When Mars Colony 7 burned, she stopped mining. She started hunting. Her ship was called Persistent. It was not a warship. It was a modified mining vessel, barely larger than a Valoran shuttle. She had rebuilt it herself, added weapons, improved the engines, painted it black so it would disappear against the void. For 2 years, she operated alone. No support, no resupply, no contact with other humans. She lived on captured supplies. She repaired her ship with stolen parts, and she killed. The number was never confirmed. Valoran records were deliberately destroyed after the war, but the estimate said at least 40 ships, maybe more, hundreds of soldiers, all killed by one woman in a mining vessel. I met her once, Cathvar said. The cadets leaned forward. Even the other veterans in the bar were listening now. My medical frigate was traveling through the belt. We had wounded soldiers aboard. We thought we were safe. Medical ships were not supposed to be targets. We flew the symbols of healing. We broadcast our identity constantly. He touched the scars on his arm. Not the ones from Yuna. Different scars. Older. She did not care about symbols. The attack came without warning. One moment, the ship was flying normally. The next, the engines were dead. Then communications. Then weapons. The crew panicked. Officers screamed orders that no one could follow. Then the airlock opened. Jisoo came aboard alone. Cathvar was in the medical bay when he heard the fighting. Gunfire. Screaming. Sounds that he still heard in his dreams. He grabbed a surgical tool and prepared to defend his patients. The door opened, and she walked in. She was small. That was the first thing he noticed. Smaller than most human soldiers. She barely reached his chest. Her face was hidden behind a dark helmet. Her body was covered in armor that looked like it had been assembled from a dozen different sources. In one hand, she held a blade. It was covered in blue blood. Cathvar stood between her and his patients. He knew he would die. He was a medic, not a soldier, but he would not let her kill wounded beings who could not defend themselves. Jisoo stopped. For a long moment, she simply looked at him. Her helmet hid her face, but he could feel her eyes studying him, studying his patients, studying the medical equipment around them. Then she spoke. Her voice was flat, empty. Like someone who had forgotten how to feel. She spoke in broken Valoran, probably learned from captured soldiers. Medic? Cathvar nodded. She looked at his patients again. Some of them were Valoran soldiers, but there were also humans, prisoners who had been wounded during capture. Cathvar had been treating them too, because that was what medics did. Jisoo saw this. She stood there for a long time. One free pass, she finally said. Then she turned and walked away. She took what supplies she needed from the ship: food, water, medical equipment, power cells. Then she left. The surviving crew drifted for 3 days before rescue arrived. 37 Valoran soldiers died on that ship. Jisoo killed every single one, but she let the medical bay live. I think about that moment often, Cathvar told the cadets. She could have killed us all. It would have been easy, but she saw that I was treating humans alongside Valorans. She saw that I was doing my job, and somehow in that monster's heart there was still room for something like honor. The young female cadet asked the question that everyone was thinking. What happened to her? Kethvar shrugged. No one knows. When the war ended, she simply disappeared. Some say she died in the final battles. Others say she is still out there, drifting in the dark, waiting for the war to begin again. An elderly veteran at the next table spoke up. He was the one missing 2 arms. His voice was rough with age and pain. I was on that frigate, he said. I was one of the wounded in the medical bay. I saw her too. The cadets turned to look at him. He is not telling you everything, the old veteran continued. He is leaving out the worst part. Kethvar said nothing. Before she left the medical bay, she stopped at the door. She took off her helmet, just for a moment. The old veteran's voice trembled. She was young, barely 30 cycles by human counting, but her eyes... He stopped. He could not continue. Kethvar finished for him. Her eyes were dead, empty, like looking into the void itself. There was no hatred there, no anger, no satisfaction, nothing at all. She had killed 37 soldiers, and she felt nothing. She had become something that was no longer quite human. He looked at the cadets. That is what war does. That is what we created. We burned their cities. We killed their families. And we turned their best and brightest into monsters who could slaughter without feeling. Lieutenant Jisoo was not born that way. We made her. Mars Colony 7 made her. And she made us pay. The bar was silent. I have told you about human courage. I have told you about human resistance. Now I must tell you about human grief. Because the darkest day of the war was not a battle. It was the day we tried to break their spirit forever. He called for another drink. Let me tell you about the day the humans wept. Let me tell you about the moment we almost won, and the choice that haunts me still. The cadets had grown quiet. The excitement that had filled their eyes at the beginning of the night was gone. In its place was something heavier. Understanding, perhaps, or the beginning of it. Kethvar held his drink but did not sip it. His hands were trembling slightly. Even after 50 years, this memory cut deep. Year 10 of the war, he began. We were losing. The words hung in the air. The cadets exchanged glances. This was not what they had learned in their history classes. The official records said the war was a difficult but necessary campaign. They said nothing about losing. The humans had adapted to everything we threw at them. They had captured our weapons and learned to use them. They had reverse-engineered our technology. They had turned our own tactics against us. For every human we killed, 2 more seemed to rise up. Our soldiers were tired. Our people at home were asking questions. The war that was supposed to last 3 rotations had dragged on for a decade. The high command grew desperate. They needed a victory. Something big. Something that would break human spirit forever. Something that would make them finally surrender. They chose Earth. Specifically, they chose a region the humans called Southeast Asia. Hundreds of millions of people lived there. Cities, farms, families. History stretching back thousands of years. It was one of the hearts of human civilization. The Empire deployed a bioweapon. Kethvar paused. His voice became very quiet. It was released at night. A virus designed specifically for human biology. It spread through the air, through water, through touch. By morning, the first deaths began. By evening, hospitals were overflowing. By the 3rd day, there were no more hospitals. There was only death. 90 million humans died. 90 million. The number was too large to understand, too large to feel. It was just a number. But Kethvar had been there for the aftermath, and he knew it was not just a number. It was children who went to sleep and never woke up. It was parents watching their families die in their arms. It was cities that fell silent, one street at a time. I was part of the occupation force, Kethvar said. We moved in 3 weeks after the release, once the virus had burned itself out. The High Command expected to find broken survivors, humans ready to surrender. They thought grief would do what our armies could not. His voice cracked slightly. They were wrong. When Valoran forces entered the dead cities, they found humans, not hiding, not fighting, not fleeing. They were gathering their dead. Millions of bodies lay in the streets, in the buildings, in the fields, and the surviving humans were collecting them, gently, carefully. With love that Kethvar could not understand. They wept as they worked, tears streaming down their faces, holding each other, speaking soft words over bodies that could no longer hear. But they did not stop. I watched them build funeral pyres, Kethvar said. Thousands of them. They did not have enough wood, so they used furniture, books, anything that would burn. They wanted to honor their dead. Even when there were too many dead to honor, even when the smoke blocked out the sun for days. The Valoran soldiers did not know what to do. They had expected resistance, anger, hatred. Instead, they found sorrow. Deep, terrible, endless sorrow. And then something strange happened. Some Valoran units were cut off from the main force during the occupation. They ran out of supplies. They sent distress signals, but help was slow to arrive. They expected to die. Instead, humans helped them. A doctor named Minji found Kethvar's unit. She was young. Her eyes were red from crying. She had lost her entire family to the virus, her parents, her sister, her little nephew who was only 3 years old. But when she saw wounded Valoran soldiers, she did not attack. She did not run. She walked up to Kethvar and asked a simple question. Do you need help? Kethvar did not understand. He tried to explain that they were enemies, that his people had just killed 90 million of hers, that she should hate him. Minji listened. Then she said something that changed him forever. If I become what you expect me to be, you win. She treated the wounded Valorans. She showed Kethvar how to help. They worked together for 2 weeks while waiting for rescue. She never spoke about her family, she never cried in front of him, but sometimes, late at night, he heard her weeping softly when she thought no one was listening. On the last day, Kethvar asked her why. Why help the enemy? Why show kindness to those who had shown none? Minji looked at him for a long time. Then she said, My nephew loved birds. He would spend hours watching them fly. When he died, I held his hand and promised him something. I promised that I would still be the person he loved. I promised that I would not let your empire take that from me. She wiped her eyes. You killed 90 million of us. You could have killed 90 million more. But you cannot kill what we are. You cannot burn away love. You cannot destroy kindness. As long as one human remembers who we are supposed to be, you have not won. Kethvar never saw Minji again. He did not know if she survived the war, but he remembered her words. He would remember them for the rest of his life. The cadets were silent. One of them was crying softly. Another was staring at the table, unable to meet Kethvar's eyes. That is not the end of the story, the old veteran said. 6 months after the bioweapon attack, human scientists did something remarkable. They reverse-engineered the virus. They learned how to make it. They modified it to work on Valoran biology. He looked at the cadets. They could have killed us all. Every Valoran in the galaxy. They had the weapon. They had the motive. After what we did, no one would have blamed them. It would have been justice. His voice became very quiet. They chose not to. The human leadership met in secret. They debated for weeks. Some wanted revenge, some wanted justice. Some wanted to end the war the only way they knew how. In the end, they voted. The weapon was never used. That is what terrifies me most about humans, Kethvar said. Not their soldiers, not their courage, not their monsters like Jisoo. What terrifies me is their mercy. They could have destroyed us completely. They had every right, every reason, and they looked at the weapon in their hands and they said no. He finished his drink. Lieutenant Jisoo killed without feeling. Captain Do-yun fought without hope, but Dr. Minji loved without condition. And the human leaders showed mercy without reason. These contradictions make no sense. How can one species contain such violence and such compassion? How can they build weapons of genocide and then refuse to use them? He shook his head. I have spent 50 years trying to understand. I still cannot. Perhaps that is why we lost. We thought we understood what humans were. We were wrong. We are still wrong. The young female cadet spoke through her tears. You said we lost. But the official records say the war ended in a treaty. They say the humans accepted their defeat. Kethvar smiled. It was a sad smile, an old smile, a smile full of secrets. Ah, yes, the treaty, the official story. He leaned forward. Would you like to know the truth? Would you like to know what really happened at the end of the war? The cadets nodded. Then let me tell you one last story. Let me tell you about Admiral Han Junho. Let me tell you about the day the humans chose peace. And let me tell you the greatest lie our empire has ever told. The bar had grown very quiet. Even the other veterans had stopped pretending not to listen. Everyone was watching Kethvar now. Everyone was waiting for the truth. The old medic looked at the cadets, these young soldiers who had come expecting stories of glory. They had heard something very different. They had heard stories of terror, of courage, of grief, of mercy. Now they would hear the lie that held the galaxy together. Year 12 of the war, Kethvar began. The High Command was preparing for final victory. After the bioweapon attack, they believed human resistance would collapse. They were planning the complete conquest of Earth, the end of the human species. He paused. Then the reports started coming in. One by one, Valoran colony worlds began falling silent. Not destroyed, not attacked, just silent. Communications stopped. Trade ships found empty ports. When investigators finally arrived, they found something impossible. The colonists were alive, healthy, safe, but they were no longer loyal to the Empire. Humans had been infiltrating our worlds for years, Kethvar said. Not as soldiers, as teachers, as traders, as friends. They learned our languages. They shared our meals. They told us stories about a place called Earth, where people from different nations learned to live together, where enemies became allies, where the impossible became real. His voice held a note of wonder even after all these years. They did not conquer our colonies. They converted them, one conversation at a time. The cadets looked stunned. This was not in any history book. This was not taught in any academy. It gets worse, Kethvar continued, or better, depending on how you see it. Human agents had penetrated Valoran Command itself, officers who had been passing information for years, scientists who had been sabotaging weapons research, diplomats who had been quietly building networks of peace. The war that the Empire thought it was winning was already lost. Human influence spread through Valoran society like roots through soil, invisible, patient, unstoppable, but the final shock was yet to come. They had developed a weapon, Kethvar said. Not the bioweapon, something worse, something our scientists still do not understand. A device that could break planets, crack them open like eggs, turn whole worlds into fields of floating rock. He looked at the cadets. They called it the hammer. The cadets went pale. The other veterans in the bar were very still. We did not know about the hammer until the peace negotiations. Admiral Han Junho brought evidence, recordings, technical data, proof that humans had built 3 of these devices and placed them in hidden locations throughout Valoran space. Kethvar remembered the moment clearly. He had been present as a medical observer. He had watched the Valoran negotiators receive the information. He had seen their faces turn gray with terror. "The Admiral could have destroyed us," he said. "3 devices, 3 planets, billions of Valoran lives. He could have ended our species in a single day, and our leadership knew it. They saw the truth in his eyes." Admiral Han Junho was a small man by human standards, old, tired. He had lost 2 sons in the war. His wife had died in the bioweapon attack. He had every reason to hate, every reason to destroy. Instead, he offered peace. The negotiations lasted 3 days. At the end, Junho gave a speech that Kethvar had memorized. He spoke in perfect Valoran. His voice was soft but firm. "We could burn the galaxy to save ourselves. We have the power. We have the right. After what you did to us, no one would question our justice." He paused. "But what remains when the fire dies? Ash. Silence. Empty worlds and empty hearts. We did not reach for the stars to prove what we could destroy. We reached for them to discover who we could become." The Admiral looked at the Valoran leaders. "We choose peace. Not because we are weak, not because we are defeated. We choose peace because we refuse to become you." The Treaty of Sol was signed that day. Humans agreed to confine themselves to their home system. No military expansion, no interference in Valoran affairs. In exchange, the Empire would leave them in peace, forever. The official history called it a human surrender, a graceful acceptance of defeat. The primitive species knew their place. It was all a lie. "The humans won," Kethvar said. "They won completely. They had the weapons. They had the allies. They had infiltrated every level of our society. They could have ruled the galaxy if they wanted to." His voice grew quiet. They did not want to. The cadets sat in stunned silence. Everything they had learned was wrong. Everything they believed was false. The species they thought was extinct was alive. The victory they celebrated was a defeat. "Why?" the young female cadet finally asked. "Why would they give up everything they had won?" Kethvar smiled sadly. "I asked Admiral Junho the same question. After the treaty was signed, I approached him. I had to know. I had to understand." The Admiral had looked at him with tired eyes, eyes that had seen too much death, too much pain, too much war. "There is a story we tell our children," Junho said, "about a warrior who conquered the world. He stood on a mountain of bodies, master of everything he could see. And he wept, because there was nothing left to love, nothing left to build, nothing left to hope for." The Admiral shook his head. "We do not want to stand on that mountain. We do not want to rule a galaxy of corpses and fear. We want to go home. We want to raise our children. We want to plant gardens and write songs and watch the sun rise over water." He put his hand on Kethvar's shoulder. "You asked why. Here is your answer. Power is easy. Any species can learn to destroy. But peace is hard. Peace takes strength that most species will never understand. We are tired of being strong in the ways of war. We want to be strong in the ways of life." Kethvar finished his story. The bar was silent. The cadets looked at each other with new eyes. "Humans are not extinct," the old veteran said. "They are alive. They are thriving. They paint pictures and make music and raise families in their little corner of the galaxy. They chose to stop fighting. They chose to let us tell lies about their defeat because they did not need us to know the truth. They knew it themselves." He stood slowly, his old joints creaking. "That is the most terrifying thing about humans. Not what they can do to you. What they can do and choose not to. What they could have taken and decided to leave. They have the power to destroy. And they choose every single day to create instead." He placed some credits on the table. I am old. I will not live much longer. But I will die knowing that somewhere in this galaxy there is a species that learned to be better than their worst moments. A species that held destruction in their hands and chose mercy. A species that terrified me for 12 years and gave me hope for the rest of my life. He walked toward the door. At that moment, it opened. A young human woman walked in, a traitor by the look of her clothes. She nodded politely at Keth Var as she passed. He nodded back. She walked to the bar and ordered a drink. She laughed at something the bartender said. Just a person, just human, completely unaware of the legends and nightmares walking beside her. The cadets watched her with new eyes. They saw her differently now, not a primitive, not a monster, not an extinct memory, just a human, going about her day, living her life. Keth Var stopped at the door. He turned back to the young soldiers. Remember what I told you tonight. Remember Yuna and her smile. Remember Do-Yun and his sacrifice. Remember Jisoo and her empty eyes. Remember Minji and her kindness. Remember Junho and his choice. He stepped into the corridor. And remember this. The most dangerous enemy is not the one who wants to kill you. It is the one who has every reason to, and walks away instead. The door closed behind him. The young human woman at the bar finished her drink. She paid her bill. She smiled at the veterans around her and wished them a good night. Then she walked out into the station, disappearing into the crowd. The cadets watched her go. They would never see the galaxy the same way again. And somewhere in the dark between stars, old veterans on both sides of a forgotten war dreamed of fire and mercy, of monsters and angels, of the day the humans wept, and the day they chose to forgive. The night on Twilight Station continued. But for 6 young cadets, everything had changed. They had wanted stories of glory. They had received something far more valuable. They had received the truth.